He walked out through the front door. Not the service entrance, not the loading dock where the night crew clocked out at 3 in the morning. The front door, brass handles the company name etched in glass for the first time in 3 years. Marcus Calloway wore the only suit he owned, the one he'd bought for his wife's funeral. The interview had lasted 11 minutes. The decision had been made before he pulled out his chair. He knew it, so he thanked each person by name, pushed his chair in quietly, and walked out. No argument, no explanation, no hesitation. 50 steps down the sidewalk, November air sharp and cold, hands in his pockets, mind already doing the math, Lily's prescription, next month's rent, the hospital bill still sitting on the kitchen counter. Then the glass door opened behind him, and a voice called his name. Not HR, not a recruiter. The name on the building itself. The Hartwell and Associates building never fully slept. Even at 1 in the morning, the elevators hummed. The HVAC pushed recycled air through 42 floors, and the emergency exit signs bled red light into the hallways. Marcus had learned the building's rhythms, the way you learn a person's not through conversation, but through proximity, through showing up night after night until the patterns became part of you. He worked the 14th floor on Wednesdays. Corner office is a conference room with a view of Lake Michigan and a long corridor that connected the executive suites to the support departments. HR was at the far end, past the water cooler, and the motivational print someone had framed and hung crooked 6 months ago. Marcus had straightened it every week since. No one had ever noticed. He was working near the HR suite when he saw the envelope. It had slipped from the mail tray on the corner of the reception desk, an internal routing envelope, the kind with a red string closure and a column of forwarding lines printed on the front. It lay on the floor at an angle one corner, folded where it had landed. Marcus picked it up, set it on the desk. Then he noticed that the flap had come open, and the single sheet inside had slid halfway out. He almost didn't read it. He read it. Client Relations Coordinator. Day shift, Monday through Friday. Salary listed in a range that made him read the numbers twice. And at the bottom of the page, under benefits, 3 words that hit differently than anything else on that sheet: full family coverage, effective date of hire. He stood under the fluorescent light in that empty hallway and read the page 3 times. Not because he didn't understand it, because he needed his brain to stop finding reasons it couldn't be real. The application deadline was in 5 days. Marcus folded the page carefully, the same way he folded Lily's drawings before putting them in his jacket pocket. He tucked it against his chest, picked up the handle of his cart, and kept moving down the hallway. But the work that had been automatic for 2 years, the sweeping, the emptying, the wiping down of surfaces no one would notice, stopped being automatic. His hands kept moving. His mind had already gone somewhere else. He got home at 20 minutes past 5. The apartment was dark, except for the television. Muted the screen, casting pale blue light across the living room. Lily was on the sofa. She had meant to wait up. He could tell, because she was still in her school clothes, sitting upright against the cushion with a piece of paper in her hand, and she had fallen asleep exactly like that, the way kids do when sleep takes them faster than they expect. Marcus crouched down next to her. He took the paper gently from her fingers without waking her. It was a drawing. Crayon the way Lily still preferred even at 9 years old, thick, uneven lines, and proportions that made all 3 figures roughly the same height. A house behind them. Green grass underneath. And at the bottom of the page in handwriting she'd been working hard to make neat, Dad. I want you to be here when I get home from school. He sat down on the floor, his back against the sofa, his daughter's weight warm and solid behind his shoulder. He didn't turn the television off. He just sat there in the blue light with the drawing in his hands and the folded job posting still in his jacket pocket, and the particular silence of a house where everyone else is asleep. Marcus was not a man who spent time imagining different versions of his life. After Claire died, he had understood very quickly that the only way through was through that grief was not a problem to be solved, but a weight to be carried, and the carrying got easier, only if you kept moving. He had kept moving. He had found the cleaning job because it was nights, and nights meant he could be home in the mornings. He had learned which pharmacies had the best price on Lily's inhaler. He had helped Damon with algebra at the kitchen table at 4 in the afternoon, and pretended not to notice that Damon was starting to understand it faster than he was. He had done what needed doing in the order it needed doing, without waiting for it to feel manageable. But sitting on that floor, he let himself stay still for a moment. The drawing said something he didn't have the language for. Not just the words, the fact of it. That she had drawn it at all. That she had waited up to give it to him and fallen asleep holding it. That she was 9 years old and already understood that her father was somewhere else when he wasn't in this room. Damon's bedroom door was closed. He was 14, now old enough to understand more than he let on. Young enough that he still left his sneakers in the middle of the hallway. Marcus had stepped over them on the way in. He looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he got up, went to the kitchen and started the coffee maker. While it ran, he sat at the table with his laptop open, a machine so old that the hinge on the left side had to be propped with a folded piece of cardboard, and he found the company's careers portal. The job posting was there, same as the sheet in his pocket. He read it again on the screen. He knew what his application would look like to a hiring committee. 2 years with no formal employment, a community college transcript with credits that stopped before a degree, a current job title that he would have to list honestly. He had no illusions about how those gaps read on paper. He had been on the other side of enough hiring decisions in his warehouse days to understand the shorthand people used, and he knew exactly which box he fell into. He thought about the insurance card, what it would mean to have one, not abstractly specifically. Lily's pulmonologist on the north side, the specialist her pediatrician had been recommending for 8 months. The appointment Marcus had scheduled twice and canceled both times when the estimate came in. The prescription adjustment that required labs, and the labs that required coverage, and the coverage that required a different kind of job than the one he had. He thought about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, what that hour looked like from inside a building instead of outside one. At 5:47 in the morning, before either of his kids stirred, Marcus Calloway submitted his application to Hartwell and Associates for the position of Client Relations Coordinator. He didn't tell anyone. He closed the laptop, propped the hinge back with the cardboard, and went to check that Lily had been moved to her bed. She hadn't woken when he'd carried her, which meant the asthma was quiet tonight, which was the only thing that let him sleep. He set his alarm for 9:30, 4 hours. The same as always. He folded Lily's drawing carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, which was hanging on the chair by the door. He did not lie there, thinking about what might happen. He was asleep in 3 minutes. He prepared the way he did everything quietly, without announcing it in the margins of a schedule that had no margins. During the day, he handled the kids, cooked, ran Lily to her follow-up at the pediatrician on Thursday. At night, he worked his floors at Hartwell. In between, in the 40 minutes he sometimes had between getting home and Damon's alarm going off, he sat at the kitchen table with his phone and worked through interview questions he'd pulled from a career prep site. He read them aloud in a low voice so he wouldn't wake anyone. He wrote his answers in a notes app, deleted them, wrote them again. He knew the building. That was something no other candidate had. He knew which partners arrived before 7 and which ones came in after 10, and what that said about how they managed their teams. He knew which floors had the highest turnover in the supply closets, which meant the highest foot traffic, which meant the client-facing floors. He knew the tempo of the place the way you know a piece of music you've heard hundreds of times, not because you studied it, but because it had moved through you long enough to leave a shape. What he didn't have was something to wear. The suit had been hanging in the back of his closet for 2 years, behind the winter coats in the dry cleaning bag he'd brought it home in after the funeral. He didn't have money for a new one. He took it to the cleaner on Ashland with $12 and asked them to press it. The woman at the counter didn't ask why. She handed him the ticket and told him it would be ready by Friday, He picked it up Friday morning, hung it on the back of his bedroom door, and told the kids he had an errand to run on Monday. Damon didn't look up from his phone. Lily asked if the errand was fun. Marcus said, probably not. Before he hung the suit up, he checked the inside breast pocket. Lily's drawing was still there, folded the way he'd left it. He left it where it was. Monday arrived the way important days always do, without ceremony, without any sign that it was different from the one before it. Marcus dropped Lily at school at 7:55, the same as always. He walked back to the apartment, changed into the suit, checked the mirror once, and left. He took the bus because parking near the building cost more than he spent on groceries in a week. The security desk at the front entrance was staffed by a man named Gerald, who had been working the morning shift for at least 2 years. Gerald had seen Marcus come through the loading bay entrance dozens of times, nodded at him, checked his badge, waved him through with the kind of easy familiarity that builds between people who share the same odd hours. Now Gerald looked at him across the lobby, with an expression that moved through several stages before settling on professional neutrality. He checked the appointment confirmation on his screen, printed a visitor badge, and slid it across the desk without comment. Marcus clipped it to his lapel and walked to the elevator. The conference room on 16 had a long table, 3 chairs on one side, and a window that looked west toward the river. Marcus sat across from 2 HR representatives, whose names he caught from their lanyards, Sandra Kowalski and a younger man named Brett, and at the center, Victor Payne. Payne was the kind of man who used stillness as a form of authority. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his attention on Marcus in a way that was completely attentive and completely unreadable. His suit was charcoal. His watch was not the kind you bought at a department store. He had the file open in front of him, but he hadn't looked at it yet. Sandra opened with the standard questions, and Marcus answered them the way he'd practiced, not scripted, but structured. He talked about the logistics coordination work from before, about the systems he'd learned, about what he understood client-facing work to require. He was specific where he could be specific. He didn't elaborate past the point of relevance. For 20 minutes, it went the way it was supposed to go. Then Payne reached forward and opened the file. He read for a moment. Not long, he'd clearly already read it. And this was a review more than a discovery. When he looked up, his expression hadn't changed. "I want to be straightforward with you, Mr. Calloway," Payne said. "There's a gap here of nearly 2 years with no formal employment. And your current role," he glanced at the page, though Marcus suspected he didn't need to, "is outside the professional track we typically consider for this position. We generally look for candidates with 4 to 5 years of corporate client services experience." He set the page down. "I want to make sure you have a clear picture of what this role entails." Marcus understood what was happening. Not from the words were professionally chosen, almost careful, but from the particular quality of the room. The way Sandra had stopped taking notes. The way Brett had shifted almost imperceptibly back in his chair, as if he'd already moved on. The decision had been made, probably before the day began. Maybe before the week began. The interview was procedural, a courtesy extended to an internal applicant, which he technically was since he worked in the building. He had prepared for this moment, too, in a different way. He had the counter-arguments. He could speak to adaptability, to institutional knowledge, to the fact that he could navigate every floor of this building with his eyes closed and had spent 2 years watching how the company actually functioned versus how it presented itself on paper. He could make the case. But he looked at Victor Payne's face and understood that the case had nowhere to land. There was a version of dignity that involved fighting for your position in a room where the decision was already written. There was another version that involved knowing when the room was finished with you and choosing how you left it. Marcus pushed back his chair and stood. He straightened his jacket. "Thank you," he said, looking at Sandra first, then Brett, then Payne. Each one. By name because he'd caught their names, because that was the kind of thing he noticed. I appreciate your time. He pushed the chair back in until it was flush with the table and walked to the door. The elevator took him to the lobby. He pushed through the brass-handled front door and walked out into November. The cold hit him cleanly, the way Chicago cold does in the morning, not gradually, but all at once, a wall of it that came off the lake and moved through the downtown corridors without slowing down. He put his hands in his pockets and started walking. No destination. Just west, along the sidewalk, because standing still wasn't something he knew how to do. His mind went where it always went, when there was nothing else to manage. The math. Lily's prescription refill was due in 12 days. The specialist appointment he'd had to cancel again last month, he'd need to call and explain again that he was looking at a different timeline for coverage. Damon had mentioned only once, and then not again, that there was a math enrichment program at school that cost $40 a month. $40 was not $40. It was a calculation, a trade, a thing that got weighed against 4 other things before it was answered. He counted steps without meaning to. 1 to 10:30. He did it when he needed something to focus on that wasn't the inside of his own head. 50 steps from the door, he heard the glass open behind him. Not the automatic slide of a lobby door, the deliberate push of someone moving with intention. Mr. Calloway. The voice was clear and unhurried, with the particular quality of someone accustomed to being heard without raising their volume. Marcus turned around. Diana Hartwell stood at the entrance of the building that bore her name. She was in her 60s, with close-cut silver hair and the kind of posture that came from decades of walking into rooms and not waiting to be acknowledged. No assistant, no security detail. Just her standing on the sidewalk in a coat the color of charcoal, looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. He walked back toward her. She didn't move to meet him halfway. Not out of indifference, he thought, but because she'd already covered the distance she intended to cover 3 weeks ago. Diana said, I came down to the 7th floor at close to 2 in the morning. I needed files from a cabinet in the West office, and I didn't want to wake my assistant. She looked at him directly. I saw you in the hallway near the restrooms, and I saw what happened. Marcus kept his face still. He knew what she'd seen. He hadn't thought about it since it happened, not because it hadn't mattered, but because it was the kind of thing you did, and then moved on from. A young intern had been locked in the men's room for a long time, long enough that Marcus had noticed. He'd knocked once, asked through the door if everything was all right, and gotten no answer. Not the silence of someone who wanted to be left alone, a different kind. He'd set his cart against the wall and sat down on the floor outside the door, and he'd just started talking not about anything important, just talking the way you talk to someone who needs to hear a voice more than they need to hear anything specific. About the building, about the way the heating system on 7 made a clicking sound on cold nights. About nothing. He'd stayed there for almost 40 minutes. When the door finally opened, the young man was in his early 20s and had been crying for most of that time. Marcus had stayed with him in the hallway until the shaking stopped, and then walked him to the elevator and watched the doors close. He hadn't filed a report. He hadn't mentioned it to his supervisor. He'd gone back to his cart and finished the floor. I watched the whole thing, Diana said. You didn't know I was there. No, Marcus said. I didn't. She studied him for a moment, and he got the sense she was confirming something she had already decided, rather than deciding it now. Victor Payne is excellent at finding people with strong records, she said. That's genuinely valuable, but that's not the same thing as finding the right people. She let that distinction stand on its own. I have a different position, senior client liaison reporting directly to executive leadership, 90-day trial, family health coverage from your first day. The wind moved between them. A cab passed on the street. Somewhere above them, 42 floors of the building hummed with the ordinary work of a Monday morning. Marcus reached into the inside breast pocket of his jacket. He felt the edge of the folded drawing without taking it out. the paper slightly soft at the crease from being carried so many mornings. He didn't need to look at it to know what it said. 90 days, he said. I'll take it. Diana nodded once, as if that was the answer she'd expected, not because she'd been certain he'd say yes, but because she'd been certain he'd mean it when he did. Come back inside, she said. There's paperwork. He followed her through the front door. The brass handles caught the morning light. Gerald at the security desk looked up and then looked quickly back at his screen with the expression of a man who understood that some things were above his pay grade to question. Marcus walked across the lobby of the building where he had mopped floors for 3 years, past the elevator bank he'd ridden 10,000 times, with a cart and a uniform, and into a different version of the same Monday morning. He did not look back. His desk was on the 19th floor in a row of 4 workstations near the window that faced east. It was not a corner office. It was not a private space. It was a desk with a monitor, a phone with more lines than he'd ever used, and a drawer that still had the previous occupant's name tag in it. Marcus put the name tag in the lost and found box by the elevator on his first morning and didn't mention it to anyone. No one was hostile. That was the thing he hadn't fully anticipated, not warmth, but the absence of overt resistance. The floor operated with the particular efficiency of people who had worked together long enough to move around each other without thinking, and Marcus was a new variable in a system that had no immediate place for him. People were polite. They answered his questions. They did not go out of their way. He was given 4 client accounts to start, the smallest in the portfolio companies, with modest retainer agreements and low complexity, the kind of accounts that generated almost no escalations and required maintenance more than management. He understood what this was. Every organization had a version of it. The test that wasn't announced as a test, the room where you either proved you were worth watching or confirmed you weren't. Marcus did the work. He returned every email within 30 minutes, even when the email didn't require urgency. He built his reports in a clean format he'd developed by looking at a dozen existing files in the shared drive and identifying where information was consistently hard to find. He kept his notes in the client system updated in real time so that anyone who pulled a file after him would have a complete picture without having to ask him questions. He didn't introduce himself as someone with something to prove. He introduced himself as the person responsible for the account, which was a different thing entirely. 3 weeks in, a woman named Rachel Simmons stopped at his desk. Rachel had been with Hartwell for 11 years. She had the particular authority of someone who had outlasted 4 rounds of restructuring and 2 changes in leadership, and the entire floor knew without being told that her opinion of a new hire mattered more than most formal reviews. She set a printed report on the edge of his desk and pointed to the summary section. "This format," she said. "Where did you get it?" "I built it," Marcus said. The standard template buries the variance data in the appendix. If a client calls with a question, you have to dig for it. I moved it to the front. Rachel picked the report back up and looked at it for a moment. "I've been saying that about the template for 2 years," she said. She set the report back down. "Send me the file." He sent it that afternoon. She didn't say anything else about it, but the following week he noticed that 2 other account managers were using a version of the same format. He didn't bring it up. The Meridian Group situation arrived on a Wednesday in his 2nd month, the way crises usually do, not announced, but suddenly everywhere. Marcus was at his desk when James Whitfield, the floor supervisor, came out of his office with the expression of someone running a calculation that wasn't adding up. Whitfield was a contained man, economical with words, and visibly uncomfortable with disorder. He stood in the center of the floor and looked around with the particular focus of someone who needed a specific answer fast. Meridian Group was Hartwell's 2nd largest client. Their contract ran to $6.2 million annually and had been managed by a senior account director named Paul Greer, who was currently in a hospital in Evanston with a cardiac event that had happened Sunday night. The two people with enough familiarity to step in were both at a financial services conference in Phoenix, with their phones on, do not disturb. Eleanor Voss Meridian's CFO had called 40 minutes ago to request an explanatory call within 2 hours regarding discrepancies she'd found in 4 consecutive quarters of risk analysis reports. Whitfield's eyes moved across the floor and stopped at Marcus. In his first weeks on the 19th floor, when the assigned accounts were quiet and the learning curve was steep, Marcus had spent his spare time reading. Not just his own accounts, everything in the shared drive he had access to. He'd read the Meridian files because they were the most complex, because he wanted to understand what the ceiling of this work looked like, and because reading was free and his time between tasks was not. Whitfield had no way of knowing this, but something in the geometry of the room, the specific shortage of options, put Marcus in his sightline. Calloway, Whitfield said. The Meridian file. How familiar are you? I've read the full account history, Marcus said, including the quarterly reports going back 6 quarters. Whitfield looked at him for a moment, with an expression that didn't quite commit to belief. Eleanor Voss is not a patient person, he said. I understand, Marcus said. I'm ready when you need me. Eleanor Voss joined the call at exactly the 2-hour mark, which told Marcus something about her before she said a word. He had spent the intervening time pulling every relevant document, running the numbers himself, and mapping the specific points where the variance in the risk analysis had originated. It wasn't malfeasance. It was a methodology error introduced in the 3rd quarter of the previous year, when the model used for sector exposure calculations had been updated without a corresponding adjustment in the weighting formula. The error was consistent across 4 quarters, which meant it was traceable, explicable, and correctable, none of which made it acceptable, but all of which made it addressable. Eleanor Voss had gray eyes and the vocal cadence of someone who had been lied to by professionals enough times to have developed a precise instrument for detecting it. She opened with the discrepancies directly by quarter with the specific figures. She did not ask for an apology. She asked for an explanation. Marcus gave her one. Not a general one, a specific one. He named the methodology shift, described how the weighting error had propagated, and explained what the corrected numbers looked like across all 4 quarters. He told her what the remediation timeline would be, how Hartwell would verify the correction, and what reporting structure would be put in place to prevent recurrence. He did not use hedging language. He did not say, "It appears," or "It seems." He said what had happened, and what would happen next. Eleanor Voss was quiet for a long moment after he finished. I want you as the primary contact on this account going forward, she said. I'll expect the corrected analysis in my inbox by Friday. You'll have it by Thursday, Marcus said. She ended the call. Whitfield had been standing by the window for the duration. He stayed there for a moment after the line went quiet, looking at nothing in particular. Then he looked at Marcus. Good work, he said. For James Whitfield, Marcus had come to understand, that was a substantial thing to say. The insurance card came in the mail on a Tuesday, in his 2nd week, in a plain envelope from the benefits administrator. Marcus was at the mailboxes in the lobby of his building when he opened it, a plastic card standard size with Lily's name listed as a dependent, alongside Damon's, and his own name at the top. He stood at the mailbox longer than the task required, just a small laminated rectangle, the kind of thing millions of people carried without thinking about it. He turned it over once, then again, as if checking that it was real. Then he went upstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and called the pulmonology practice on the north side, the one Lily's pediatrician had been recommending for 8 months, the one he had called twice before and canceled twice before when the cost estimate came in. The receptionist asked for his insurance information, and he read it off the card, and she put him on hold for less than 2 minutes and came back with an appointment date 3 weeks out. He wrote the date on the paper calendar on the refrigerator. Next to Lily's drawing, which he had finally moved from the inside pocket of his jacket to the door of the fridge, held in place by a magnet shaped like a pineapple. The specialist adjusted Lily's treatment plan after running tests that her regular pediatrician hadn't had the equipment to order. A different inhaler, a different protocol for the damp weather flares that had been hitting her every few weeks through the fall. The first bad night after the adjustment, Marcus lay awake waiting for the coughing to start from down the hall. It didn't start. He lay there anyway because the habit of waiting for it was going to take longer to leave than the thing itself. But the nights where she woke him became less frequent, then infrequent, then rare. Damon noticed in the way 14-year-olds notice things sideways without admitting he was paying attention. One evening he came to the kitchen while Marcus was making dinner and stood at the counter for a moment, before saying without preamble that he'd looked up the math enrichment program at school. "It's $40 a month," Damon said with the particular flatness of someone who had already decided the answer was no and was saying the number only to confirm it. "I know," Marcus said. "Sign up." Damon looked at him. "Sign up," Marcus said again, and turned back to the stove. Damon signed up. He didn't make a production of it. That was his way. The 90th day fell on a Thursday. Diana's assistant had sent a calendar invitation 2 weeks prior. No subject line, just a time, and a conference room number, 42, the executive floor. Marcus had been on that floor once before, in his 3rd year on the night crew, when a colleague had called in sick and he'd covered the shift. He remembered that the carpet was a different texture than the other floors, denser, and that the windows on the south side had a view that extended past the lake on clear days. He had been there with a cart and a uniform. He had done the work and gone home. He took the elevator up at the appointed time, wearing a different suit than the one he'd worn to the interview, a dark navy one he'd bought off a clearance rack 3 weeks into the job, because the funeral suit deserved to go back to the closet and stay there. Diana's office had the south-facing windows. She was standing at them when he came in, looking out at the city, and she turned when she heard him cross the threshold. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, and he sat. "The Meridian Group signed a 3-year extension this morning," she said. "Eleanor Voss's office sent over the paperwork before 9. She included a note." Diana looked at him with something that might have been amusement and might have been satisfaction. "Eleanor Voss does not include notes." "I didn't know that," Marcus said. "Most people don't get one," Diana said. "That's the point." She set a folder on the desk and slid it toward him. "The position is confirmed. The title moves to Senior Client Liaison as of Monday. The compensation adjustment is in there." Marcus didn't open the folder immediately. He looked at it for a moment, and then looked at her. "I want to tell you something," Diana said, and her voice shifted slightly, not softer, but more direct, the way people speak when they're saying the thing they actually mean. "Victor looks for people with strong records, polished files, the kind of background that signals low risk. That's genuinely useful, I'm not diminishing it. But records are documentation of the past. They don't tell you much about what a person does when no one's watching, and there's nothing in it for them." She looked at him steadily. "You sat outside a bathroom door on a Tuesday night and talked to a stranger for 40 minutes because he needed someone to stay. You didn't report it. You didn't mention it. You finished the floor and went home." She let that stand on its own. That's not something that shows up in a file. But it's the thing that determines whether I want someone in a room with my clients. Marcus held her gaze. "I've been doing the work," he said. "I know," Diana said. "That's why we're having this conversation in this room instead of a different one." He opened the folder then. Read the page carefully the way he read everything. When he set it back down, there was nothing in his expression that could be called surprise, not because the number didn't mean something, but because he had learned a long time ago not to let things land on his face before he understood them. What it meant was Lily's doctor. Damon's program. The hospital bill on the counter that had been sitting there so long he'd stopped seeing it. It meant 5 o'clock. He signed where indicated. Diana witnessed it without ceremony. They shook hands across the desk. He was in his car at 4:47 that afternoon. He had never left downtown Chicago at 4:47 on a weekday. The traffic moved the way it always moved in that hour, dense on the expressway, better on the side streets, and he took the side streets, and he pulled up in front of his building at 11 minutes past 5. The door of the apartment opened before he reached it. Lily had been watching from the window. He understood that immediately. From the way she came through the door, already in motion, no coat, no shoes, running across the few feet of hallway between the door and the landing, and into him with the full conviction of a 9-year-old who had not learned yet to moderate how much she showed. He caught her. She wrapped her arms around his neck and didn't say anything and didn't need to. Over her shoulder, he could see Damon in the doorway. Damon was 14, and 14 had its own dignity to maintain. He stood with his hands in his hoodie pocket and his shoulder against the doorframe, his face doing the careful work of not showing too much. But he stayed in the doorway. He didn't go back inside. Marcus carried Lily into the apartment and set her down and looked at his son. "Hey," Damon said. "Hey," Marcus said. That was enough. They ate dinner at the kitchen table, the three of them, and after dinner, Lily brought her homework and spread it across half the table and asked Marcus questions she probably already knew the answers to, because asking was the point, not the answers. Damon sat across from her pretending to watch something on his phone and occasionally correcting her arithmetic without being asked. Marcus sat at his own end of the table and did not think about the hospital debt or the check that would hit the account on Friday or the things that were still unfinished. Those things were still there. They would be there tomorrow. But tomorrow was not now, and now was a thing he had not had enough of for a long time. On the refrigerator, Lily's drawing held its place under the pineapple magnet, 3 figures in crayon roughly the same height, standing in front of a house with green grass underneath. The handwriting at the bottom that she'd worked hard to make neat. "Dad, I want you to be here when I get home from school." Marcus Calloway had not changed his life because someone rescued him. He had not changed it because of luck or timing or a door that happened to open. He had changed it because one night in the quietest corridor of a building that had never once looked at him, he had sat down on a cold floor beside a locked door and stayed. Not for a reward, not because anyone was watching, because it was the right thing, and he was the only one there to do it. It turned out someone had been watching, not to reward him, to recognize what was already there. He was here. That was the whole of it.